Aanstaande vrijdag is het D-Day voor de Britten, de Brexit. Ik bespreek het met de Engelse bestseller-auteur Elizabeth Day. Ze schreef het boek The Party over de diep verdeelde Engelse klassenmaatschappij. Een meeslepende thriller over de macht van de heersende elite en de aantrekkingskracht van deze upper class op gewone stervelingen. Miljoenen fans kennen Elizabeth ook van een van de best beluisterde podcasts ter wereld, How to Fail, waarin ze beroemdheden interviewt over de grote mislukkingen in hun leven. Mag ik een groot applaus voor Elizabeth Day? Welcome, Elizabeth, welcome.
Thank you.
It's a privilege to have you here in the studio.
Oh, I'm so honoured to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Is the Brexit, which is going to happen this Friday, is that a party for you?
No, it's the opposite.
Yeah?
It's only a party in the sense that it would be a wake. The kind of wake you have after a funeral. Oh. I mourn Brexit with every fibre of my being. I'm not ready for it. I've been living in a state of denial. I can't believe it's happening next week. I'm clinging on to my European Union passport.
Because you have a European passport as well?
I do. Well, I can actually, technically, I can claim an Irish passport.
Yeah.
So I think I'll be doing that come Friday.
How are you going to spend this Friday?
Probably drinking myself into oblivion. I'll drink some nice European wine.
Oh, some French wine.
Yes.
Your book, The Party, is about the... I have it here in Dutch, het Feest. The book is about the unlikely friendship between two men, Ben and Martin. Ben comes from an upper-class English family, aristocrats. And Martin is more of a simple guy, a single mom raised him, working class, right?
Yeah.
How would you describe their friendship?
You're right to say it's an unlikely alliance because Martin has always been an outsider. From his upbringing, his father died before he was born. He's raised by a slightly odd single mother. Mm-hmm. And he gets a scholarship to a private school in England. And once he ends up at that school, he starts entering a world that he doesn't understand, but he desperately wants to belong to it because for him, it's a world of impossible glamour. Mm. And he meets Ben at school, and Ben is charming, self-confident, at ease with himself, aristocratic, good-looking, had to get that in there. And Martin not only wants to be part of that world, he wants to be Ben. He wants to feel at ease in his own skin. And the terrible tragedy of Martin is that his love for Ben and the world that Ben inhabits will always be unrequited.
Oh, the tragedy. Where did you get the idea to write this book, The Party?
Well, I went to a party myself. So, as you all know, as a journalist...
Mm-hmm. You're also a journalist.
I'm also a journalist, yeah. You get invited to all these parties that you don't belong in either, that you get invited to parties to network and to cover for newspapers, at least I did. Mm-hmm. And so I found myself at this incredibly glamorous 50th birthday party in the Cotswolds, in the heart of the English countryside.
Which is probably very... posh. Right?
It was so posh.
Yeah.
But it was so interesting. It was held by a PR man, so a publicist to the stars. And what was interesting about it was that the party followed a lot of the old rigid class structures in that there were the elites in attendance, there were the British aristocrats, but there was also a whole new class system at play of supermodels, celebrities, people who had newfound fame and wealth, and they were all mixing together. And in attendance at that party was the Prime Minister at the time, David Cameron, the UK Prime Minister, and the former Prime Minister, Tony Blair, as well as Naomi Campbell, the supermodel, and various TV presenters. And it was the most extraordinary party I'd ever been to. And
In what way extraordinary?
Well, because it was so interesting to see the heart of politics and power rub shoulders and be impressed by wealth and celebrity. And it felt like the boundaries between those two worlds had become more and more porous, and one was influencing the other. So from my perspective, and maybe I'm a very serious, boring person, but I didn't think the Prime Minister should be there. I thought he should be hard at work governing the country.
Because was there some crisis happening at that moment?
There was,
There's always a crisis.
There's always a crisis when you're Prime Minister, you're right.
Yeah.
But there was actually an inquiry starting the next day about the practices of the tabloid press in the UK, the phone hacking scandal, which was all about how editors used to hack into people's voicemails to get news stories. And that inquiry was starting the next day. And there was something that didn't sit well with me. And it made me think about the politics in our country and how damaging it can be when you have politicians who have been educated at very privileged institutions, from Eton to Oxbridge, and then go straight into a career in politics, and they have no sense of what life is like for real people.
No, because they're just partying with Naomi Campbell and other celebrities.
They've got this bubble of privilege. And that really bothers me as someone who is living a life that is dictated to by the people making our laws.
Yeah.
That really bothers me. And that was the genesis of the party.
That's the genesis.
Yeah. I mean, I was lucky enough to go to Cambridge University, which is obviously an elite institution.
Yeah.
And Cambridge was wonderful in many ways, but there was also a window into this kind of class system. And there were definitely people there who I felt, having been insulated by their privilege much of their lives, felt that they could be careless with the rest of us. Nothing really counted to them.
But you said you studied at Cambridge. Are you part of this elite?
No, well, no, in the sense that I've always been something of an outsider. So I, like Martin, won a scholarship to a good school, but I grew up in Ireland where I never fully fitted in.
But you have a British accent.
Exactly. Well, that's why I never fitted in. And no, I wouldn't consider myself part of the aristocracy at all.
Okay. And why are you so fascinated with this team you wrote about also, the British class system?
I'm fascinated by the things that are left unsaid, but that govern the way that we behave. And I think that...
Like?
Well, like all forms of discrimination, I believe that a lot of laws have been passed against forms of discrimination, which does not mean that it no longer exists. It means it's been driven underground and it's more insidious. So it becomes a matter of understanding the semaphore at play within conversations. It's not obvious anymore. And I'm very interested in themes like that as an author, the gap between what is being said and what is being meant.
Yeah, culture.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the main character in the book, Martin, from the working class background, he desperately wants to be part of this elite, of this upper class. Why? Why does he want to belong to this group?
I think because he's never felt the security of love. The love that he's felt has always been conditional on certain things. And so he attaches his obsession to Ben, and actually his obsession with Ben becomes quite dangerous. So Martin, although I've said I'm quite similar to him because I also got a scholarship,
You're not dangerous.
No, I'm not a sociopath, but he really does have sociopathic tendencies, and his love for Ben is obsessive and repressed. But Martin is not honest with himself about himself, so he can never truly be loved. And again, that's the fatal flaw in his character.
Is this comparable to the British public? In a very abstract way?
Do you think we're self-hating? Yeah, it's interesting.
There's a little bit of self-hate in everybody, but...
Yeah, well, there's also, I believe, a bit of self-sabotage with Brexit. So I do think that there is an interesting culture in Britain, and I love Britain, obviously, because I come from there, but we are an island nation, and I wonder how much we felt we had to defend ourselves from invaders, and internally we've had to defend ourselves from the invasion of our emotions. So we're quite repressed.
In that way. You're going to read out a scene for us, which is significant to you. It's one of the last chapters in the book, where Martin's wife, Lucy, who's also a character, reflects on the upper class. Go ahead.
And I'm sad I'm not reading it in Dutch, so please forgive me.
You're forgiven.
I had underestimated the power of the Fitzmaurice allure. Being around people like that, wealthy, privileged, beautiful, selfish people, is not good for the soul. They are careless with the rest of us. It is not consciously malicious, it is simply a lack of imagination for other people's lives. But the impressionable among us, the misfits, the insecure, the bitter and the vulnerable, we are swept into their golden currents as weak swimmers overcome by a washing tide. We want to be them while hating them for being it.
Yeah, thank you. What does that power allow the character Ben Fitzmaurice, who belongs to the upper class, the aristocrat? What does that power allow him to do?
The power allows him, as Lucy says there, not to have to make an effort to imagine what other people's lives are like. So I think at its worst, class elitism means a lack of empathy for your fellow man. And so Ben can make terrible choices and do terrible things. He's not a terrible person, but he's unwitting in some of the stuff that he does. And his family can hush it up. And one of the major plot points in the book, which I won't give away, but is precisely about that. It's about the insulating power of his kind of privilege. He can get away with stuff.
Yeah, heavy stuff.
Yes,
extreme stuff.
exactly.
Yeah. And the last sentence, we want to be them while hating them for being it. What did Lucy mean with this sentence?
Well, so Lucy, who is Martin's wife in the book...
From a normal background.
Yes, she's very normal. She's the most normal person in the book. And she starts out as quite a meek character. You think she's meek because you only view her through Martin's perspective at first. And then you realise that she's actually pretty strong. And she sees things as they really are. So she calls out rubbish when she sees it. She's a truth teller.
Yeah.
And she means that there is a hypnotising allure to wealth and glamour because at the same time as it's inaccessible, we're also encouraged in modern society to believe that it's within our grasp. There are all these talent contests that are predicated on the power of the exceptional, the idea of being plucked out of your normal life and riches will follow. And so there's this tension between that because ultimately you can't belong to this world, and yet there's part of you that feels you should be able to.
Is that dangerous in reality?
I think it's really dangerous because it's actually one of the things I talk about in How to Fail. The danger of being discontented with normality means that you're condemning yourself to a fundamentally dissatisfied life. Whereas actually I believe that the route to joy is finding happiness within contentment. So it's finding a degree of joy within the normal and the mundane.
But do you think also the fact that people are so fascinated with the upper class, with the rich people, that they allow them to do these, to abuse power, that they allow them to be corrupt? Is that also a danger?
Absolutely. I mean, I think I wrote The Party at a time when David Cameron was Prime Minister. He went to Eton and Oxford. The Party was then published. We had a different Prime Minister, a woman, who was not educated at a private school.
Theresa May.
And I thought, oh no, the Party, it's no longer relevant. But then it turns out that we've just elected a Prime Minister who went to Eton and Oxford.
Boris Johnson.
Boris Johnson, who was there at the same time as David Cameron. And I just sort of think, why do we have this compulsion to be ruled by people who we think are better than us?
What's the answer?
I think it's a lot to do with a lack of faith in our own instincts as normal people. There's a sense that we want to be ruled by people who talk a good game. They seem to know what they're doing. My fear is that they don't actually know what they're doing and they're fundamentally self-interested.
That's what you think of Boris Johnson?
I mean...
This is on national TV.
I would love to be proved wrong, but my concern is that Boris Johnson and people who have had that kind of life experience are making decisions that will impact the rest of us much more than they will impact him and his own family.
Okay, that's very clear. You've interviewed Boris Johnson quite a few years ago, before he became Prime Minister, obviously. Why is he so popular? What's the X factor?
I have to say he's very charming. I went determined to dislike him, and I couldn't stick to that determination. I think it's because as people living in the 21st century, we lust after authenticity. We want someone to be real to us. And that's seen the rise of the character politician. And we think that Boris Johnson is being real with us in the same way that I'm sure some of the people who voted for Donald Trump believe that Donald Trump is being real with them because he seems unvarnished and rough around the edges.
Rough hair.
Yeah, rough hair. They both have rough hair. And I think that we wrongly equate that with someone who's going to tell us the truth and speak as they find. And I think that's why we are in this situation. We got sick of smooth politicians who just spoke in sound bites. We wanted someone who seemed a bit less trained and therefore more trustworthy.
But do you think Boris Johnson is less trained or actually very well trained?
I think he's very well trained, and that's a very astute question. One of the things that I've heard about Boris Johnson repeatedly, you mentioned his kind of roughed up hair, is that he does that deliberately. So quite often before he goes on stage to give a speech, he will rough up his hair so that he looks unprepared.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Your latest book, in English, I have the Dutch title here, How to Fail in English, which is a big success, but it was followed by your podcast where millions of people are listening to. And you're also interviewing celebrities, I guess, right? Would you say that the Brexit is a failure people can learn something from?
Definitely.
What could people learn from the Brexit?
I think the thing about Brexit, as much as I personally disagree with it, I also know that there are members of my family who voted for it. And the thing about it is that it made us have a national debate about the European Union. And I think it educated many people who didn't know very much about what the European Union actually did. So if I had to take a positive from it, it is that actually we were very politically engaged as a nation. And whilst many of us might not have agreed with the result, that is a positive, because it's the opposite of apathy.
So you do see something positive in the
I always have to try and be optimistic about
and what would you say is going to happen with the British class system? Is it crumbling down? Could you say that? Because I was thinking about it, and the news the last 2 weeks is about Harry and Meghan and the fact that they stepped down as royals. Would you say that's like the class system crumbling down? Is that modern class system?
I think so.
Almost. Is it?
It's a very interesting time. I think what Harry and Meghan did is supremely brave. They set a really extraordinary boundary. They said, no, this is enough, and we are taking a step away for the good of our family. And that has never been done before in constitutional history. And a lot of us were very shocked by it as a result. But I think what that exemplifies is that there are different power centres now, and that Harry and Meghan might well be the new Barack and Michelle. They might well be the new Oprah Winfrey. That actually power is to be had in different nerve centres now, and some of that power can come from making a really incredible Netflix documentary. It doesn't all have to come from the British class system anymore. So I think we're seeing the levelling out of different power structures. I hope, anyway.
So it might be the end of all the lords and all the wealthy families.
I don't think we'll ever get rid of the House of Lords, to be honest. We're just too hidebound to tradition. We like the clothes.
Yeah, OK. Thank you so much, Elizabeth.